Karen LaMonte is a sculptor of note. I think she's going to be a person that we're going to be looking at her work for a long time. Her work is really, really intriguing. She primarily works in glass, and she's very talented. She works a large scale, generally life size. I first saw her work at the Palm Springs Museum of Art. Her work is part of their permanent collection. And it's stunning, it's ethereal, intriguing. In different lights, it looks unique. Sometimes it looks kind of pale green, sometimes almost pink, and sometimes white. It really has a lot to do with the lighting. And so here it is displayed at the Palm Springs Museum of Art. And you may recognize yourself in the background. A few of my students, kind of the back of them is shown, so you're not really identifiable. And yeah, it's also a shahuli in the back. There's a gorgeous shahuli chandelier at the Palm Springs Museum of Art. Hopefully we'll get to go on field trips again and get to go see them. So she's internationally known. She used to work in New York, and now she works in Prague. So she's in the Czech Republic. And her attention to detail is really quite unique. Now, this is a segmented work. There is a clip online that shows them actually installing the work, and it's actually in 3 chunks and kind of stacked on each other, and then it has this kind of a rod connecting them. So kind of like the pillars of the Parthenon, really, because if you've ever looked close at the pillars of the Parthenon, those columns are segmented also. And so you can kind of see the divisions of it. But it's really, really well done. So, but light definitely changes the effect, as you can see. When they move it to different locations, lighting definitely matters. That's true of all paintings as well. So this is Evening Dress with Shawl, 2004. Cast glass, her training, Rhode Island School of Design, Grad School Academy of Art, Architecture and Design in Prague. She's also an award winner for a couple of actually art awards. She's become pretty good at finding resources to support her art, because sculpture is expensive, and it's expensive to produce. So she was a Fulbright scholar, and so that gave her a couple $1,000s. And then she's also found grants and things to study in other places as well. She's good at that. So interest in identity and how clothing reflects self. I'll also include some clips of her talking about her work, because that's always important. She's especially interested in the female form. You do tend to see women that aren't super skinny, and they're not very large. There's definitely a type to her form. She says that it's not that she doesn't think those shapes aren't lovely, just she definitely seems to have a consistent form that she tends to use. There's some differentiation though. She probes the ideas of social skin and natural skin, and also gesture, the way in which a person's arms slope or how they sit. She tries to very, very carefully reproduce that as well. She was talking in one of her clips about how one of her models was sad, and so she kind of wanted to have that bit of heaviness to the figure. So born 1967, and grew up visiting New York museums. She's been very influenced by art. Definitely you can see some influence of classical tradition. She studied in Seattle at the Pilchuck Glass School in Washington. This is called Vestige. It's an early work and took a year to complete using the lost wax technique. And I'll also put a 6-minute clip on there that explains it a whole lot better than I could, talking about the different stages. So works in ceramic, glass, and bronze, but I think she's best known for these. Now, when I saw this particular bust, I immediately kind of makes you think of Cinderella or something. there's a fairy tale quality to this cast glass. It's 17 inches by 21 inches by 13, so, you know, life size. And then the Darlington crystal slippers are just for reference only. It's not by Karen LaMonte. Early works, you see color used here. It certainly doesn't really you don't really see her style here other than they're figural. And so started using clothing as a metaphor for identity, and certainly these kind of puppet, kind of clown or carnival puppets are a hint of what her work would become, but in no way really resembles the work she does today. I love the contrast of the classical sarcophagi with the very, very contemporary view of LaMonte's work in the foreground. It's just really quite so lovely. It's just somewhat expressionistic. Even though you don't see a figure, you see the gesture of the figure. You see the way in which the figure holds itself. But the classical influence is really, really clear. In particular, that wet drapery effect, which is something they use to often describe classical works. This one is by Phidias, sometimes spelled differently, and sometimes Pheidias, but in any case, important Greek sculptor that's known for the Parthenon marbles. And these are, of course, the marbles that are greatly argued about as far as who do they belong to, Greece or Britain, Lord Elgin, if you pronounce it. Scotland pronounces it one way, England pronounces it another. But Lord Elgin, also the Elgin marbles. There's a lot of question as to cultural proprietorship. Who owns these? Yes, Lord Elgin got the permission to take these out of Greece. But now, of course, it's so tied to Greece's cultural identity that they'd really like to have them back, but I don't think that's likely to happen either. But in any case, it is an interesting conflict. But you can definitely see the contrast. So there's a long, long history of reclining nudes. You know that because I gave you the history of reclining nudes in this class. And here you can definitely see different interpretations as well. You have Henry Moore's reclining figure. She's boxy and doesn't have the lightness that the other figures have. And his is much more heavy and angular, really. So here you can see a detail of the Parthenon maidens. Now these are supposedly goddesses at the birth of Athena. Now there's some argument as to who the goddesses are, because there's also the story of Aphrodite being brought up from the foam of the sea, and so different interpretations are associated with Aphrodite, but here Aphrodite is indeed laying across her mother's lap, Dione. Glass dress, 2019. So again, this is pretty current, so I wanted you to see that she's still active in this sculpture, these type of sculptures. And then here you can see the different views. I just think her work's stunning. I love the juxtaposition, though, of the classical past with her very much contemporary work. It's really unique. So this is Undine, life-size, 59 inches tall, the power of clothing to shape identity. And Undine is associated with a water sprite. So she's also looking back to the past. So this is more recent work, October to January 2021, Berry Museum in Virginia. And so her works celebrate form, fashion, flow. I just think they're gorgeous. They look very, very Baroque, as a matter of fact. Indeed, she cites this work as pivotal to her fascination with drapery. And this is the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. And in the Baroque, the fabrications were often active and flowing and very, very swirling, and particularly Bernini's work. And this is definitely, you can kind of see her looking back to the past with her work as well, because a lot of her drapery is very, very active. Now, the story of Saint Teresa is this was actually a mystic nun. She was believed to be so spiritual that when she would pray, sometimes she would levitate. She would float up. And so this is that moment where she is being pierced with the Holy Spirit, and you see the angel holding this arrow. And so she's in this state of ecstasy, which happens to look like another type of ecstasy as well, and that was very intentional as far as Bernini. He did stuff like that. So what makes the body beautiful? She said, so far I haven't seen a body that's not been beautiful to me in some way. So it's really a tough question. I don't know. But again, I think there is a style that she chooses. There's a difference between health and beauty. For example, I think of the paintings of Jenny Saville. She paints these paintings of incredibly corpulent women, and they're extraordinarily beautiful. That's the sheer abundance of the image that's extraordinary. It's sort of a Baroque body. But for me, the ultra-thin becomes scary. To me, it always looks like a type of illness. I know that's equally unhealthy as an overweight woman. Functionality should be the first priority. Functionality and health when it comes to your own body. So here you have a little bit of a motivation for not choosing to show obese women or extremely thin women. And she was referencing a contemporary artist, Jenny Saville's portraits. If you were to see Jenny Saville, and in interviews she talks about how many of these are self-portraits, and you look at her and go, but she's not that large. But the vantage points that the painting is done at, it's like a really, really bad photograph that's been taken from the floor looking up. And so sometimes the figures are foreshortened and distorted and sometimes mannerist in style. But certainly her work is provocative. She has a major work on display at the Broad. It's huge, and it's a triptych work. But she again is referencing the body types of Jenny Saville. And I have talked about Jenny Saville and also Lucian Freud in my classes as well. This is also Lucian Freud's benefit supervisor resting, and you can see the model sitting there in the front, and then you can compare it to Jenny Saville's work as well. You can certainly see Jenny Saville was informed, I would say, by the realism of Lucian Freud. So this work, also shown at the Chrysler Museum in Virginia, Reclining Dress Impression, and here's a different view of it. And then again, you can also see the very Greco-Roman style of the drapery in the niche right behind. Nocturnes, Night Music, 2015. These are made of white bronze. And but again, she's most known for these ephemeral glass figures. But the style on these is quite lovely and quite classic as well. Now these are maquettes. Maquettes are small models. Before you use expensive materials, you want to make sure you know what you're doing. And so indeed, that's what she does here. And so these are some of the maquettes that she uses to conceptualize her work, her sculptures, before she begins. Part of the Nocturne exhibition, 2015. The details on this is just gorgeous. Reclining figure number 1, Nocturne. Again, look at even the details of the pattern in the dress in this one. And the coloration is really gorgeous as well. She's also decided to balance her work by also addressing a Japanese style in her work. And so she started to basically look to the past in Japan and produce these gorgeous ukiyo-e works. And she actually would find these vintage robes at surprisingly reasonable rates, unless it's something that's part of a strong family history. They're not always cherished. So some of these vintage things she was able to pick up fairly affordably. And these particular fashions, she should wear them, but she'd also produce these in bronze and glass and other materials, but they're stunning. Now, she did say that they're not as curvilinear, they're not as curvy, that she tends to like, there's a lot of padding to make the women more column-like. So the aesthetic of the figure is a little different as well. But again, I'll put some clips on, and you can also explore the topic online. So ukiyo-e is that floating world courtesan culture. These prints are very, very prized in the 1800s. Here we see the kanzashi hair ornaments that originally indicated the woman was a prostitute until it was popularized and a lot of upper class women started to wear them. But the details of her work are just absolutely scrumptious. So here you can see them in bronze and that beautiful patina, that beautiful copper-colored patina. And these patinas can be done naturally through being outside. They can also be done artificially to get these really rich patinas. It's interesting how the different colors really do make a difference in how they are perceived. So these are from 2010s. 2012. And this is Shado, and it references a Japanese tea ceremony. So really, really lovely. And doesn't show the patterning, but it certainly has the beautiful shape of the tea ceremony robe. And semi-reclining drapery. Here again, it's a little bit more simplified. But it's interesting that she has it in a seated position as well. And this, again, we're looking straight back to the classical past. So, yes, I know, it's almost bedtime. All right, well, thank you, and I will talk with you all later.